and why we need to, why government action and legislation needs to consult with First Nations and other Indigenous groups in Canada. I'm not going to cover quite the detail Heather did, but I am going to set that legal, political, and historical context as well. We'll go one more. So, when you look at what Aboriginal rights are anyway, it's because of the uniqueness. Now, in Canada, we live in a wonderful liberal democracy, like most Western democracies have human rights and so on, charters of rights. We have we're late getting it, 1982 in Canada, but we have that type of country where we all enjoy similar human rights. However, that liberal democracy and those values and the laws, the systems, the institutions, were imposed on the people who were here first. Right? We've got to keep that in mind. There's a uniqueness of Indigenous people. They were here. I suppose it's almost like the analogy that I invite you into my house, so you come on in, we eat. Next thing, maybe the following week, you push me into the back bedroom, and then maybe at some point in time, underneath the stairs, you know, that little closet, that's where I end up. In essence, that's a little bit of what happened here. The treaty relationship that the Royal Proclamation set out is viewed. There's actually some scholars who wrote on this. This official view of what treaties are all about is like a land purchase. When in fact, when you interview the elders or you talk to Indigenous leaders about their view of what the treaty relationship was that it was a nation-to-nation agreement that we agree to live, coexist peacefully, and share in the lands and resources, not push us to some little closet somewhere and take all the wealth. So if you want to know where Indigenous people are coming from, that's maybe where I'm going to get to by the time I wrap this up. But there's this uniqueness. The courts have called it sui generis. It just means unique. That's the thing about lawyers, and I think doctors are the same, right? They can charge high fees when they can say some Latin words. But it is this historical constitution, now recognized constitutionally, fact, historical fact that they were here first. The Supreme Court of Canada has talked about this in the Supreme Court cases, our highest Aboriginal law cases, that there's a recognition, and the courts have recognized that these were existing sovereignties here. And in fact, in the Vanderpeet case, they talk about what has to happen is the governments, both federal and provincial governments, have to reconcile sovereignties, right? Provinces have full sovereignty in their provincial territory for those provincial legislation. Our federal government has the sovereignty within our country, and Indigenous people have these sovereignties that has to be respected. The court talks about this reconciliation. You may have heard the term new relationship. I think that's a great term. I don't know that it's been respected enough, but I think maybe industry is leading that a lot more. There are some governments who made attempts at that. In British Columbia, the former premier, Gordon Campbell, brought a case against the Nisga'a Treaty, and when he became premier, I would argue he shifted 180 degrees in his stance in the way he was going to deal with Indigenous peoples, and he actually had a policy called the New Relationship. The Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples also talked about this new relationship. So that's really where Indigenous people want to get back to. If you ask me, consultation provides a second opportunity to get the treaty relationship right. Right? The treaty relationship was this: get out of our way, we've got your land and resources, go over there. To the court cases that brought consultation requirement back in, gives First Nations another opportunity to enjoy the benefits of the lands and resources that were taken from them. So anyway, I'd like to leave you with that thought too, that I think this is a second chance to get it right. But let's move on here from the uniqueness of the indigenous peoples. Maybe before I move on, I'm going to say one more thing about this country we live in and the equal rights we all enjoy. I would argue most ethnic minorities believe this. Certainly, I would argue Quebecois believe it as well. We want to be equal, treated equally in Canada, enjoy its rights, be treated respectfully, but we want to also be respected for our difference, right? And Indigenous people have that unique historical constitutional difference. That's why we get to consultation. That's why rights are being litigated, negotiated, and so on. What do those damn Indians want? That's what they want. They want that respect. Recognition and respect for the rights that they were here first, share in that economic benefits of the resources, and also be respected for that difference, that identity and culture that each nation has. Blackfoot, Cree, Métis, or whoever people you are. So the whole development of, so I'm setting this historical and constitutional context of where consultation comes from. And Heather talked about the Royal Proclamation as being one important part of that. So there were these policies, the Royal Proclamation, and there was some case law happening around the world, because Heather focused on North America, but this is happening all over the world. These imperial powers are going around the world and dispossessing the native peoples, the indigenous peoples of those countries. And there was all kinds of debates about whether or not these indigenous people were real people with rights that we should respect, because they weren't Christian, right? There were Christian princes, had the blessing of the Pope to go around the world and crush infidels and others and take their lands. So this notion of terra nullius, the land is vacant. You know, I suppose they thought that indigenous people were like coyotes and wolves. I mean, you just push them out of the way, right? To scatter over there and we can use their lands. Was some of the thinking, in a crude way, that's really what was happening. But this development of the Royal Proclamation, a series of case law and these policies, the British government recognized that there was this notion of indigenous rights, Aboriginal rights, entitled, that there was a notion of it that needs to be respected. So, like Heather said, the Royal Proclamation did set out this process that if you're going to enter onto these indigenous lands, you need to enter a treaty relationship with them in a public gathering, and they have to consent to some, and quite often it was touching the pen. I don't think that many actually signed the X. I think some government official was signing them. It was a symbolic touching of the pen and a handshake in the agreement. What the courts have also found is this notion that what Aboriginal rights are is this prior use and occupancy. It was recognized that they were there, they were using this land, but these courts have never stated that they have full ownership. In any Christian prince, which became a government over time, the English government, and then later the American government, once they asserted that jurisdiction over the territory, the courts were interpreting that as the Crown, at the time they called it the Crown, the government, had the underlying title and will recognize that the indigenous people use the land, will respect that, but we still own it. We have jurisdiction over it. That's some of the legal theory behind that. I have that contingent rights theory there. There was a debate in law, in legal theory, especially in Aboriginal rights law, about whether there were these inherent rights or whether they're contingent rights. Right? Heather's absolutely true. When the king said, this is the law, that's what it was. They could give you rights and they could take it away. So your rights were contingent on the Crown, or like the king or a government giving you those rights, contingent on the sovereign recognizing those.